kind of like when you wake up from a dream, you don't say, "Oh, I didn't have that dream," but you
Yeah.
just say, "That was one hell of a dream," or
That
"That
was
was
a
one
wild
one
thing. Yeah.
wild crazy dream." Yeah,
Right. It's
yeah,
not about resisting or trying to get rid of.
mhm,
See the innocence underneath all of that projection of fear and guilt. Your perception changes.
exactly.
You
So true.
recognize that as just an aspect of the ego out there.
Right. And we
That's
can't
true.
do that with the ego.
Right.
We have to use the other part of our mind
Yeah.
that looks at the ego without condemnation, which the ego can't do. It's the forgiving mind
Yeah.
that is willing to overlook the insanity. It doesn't deny its
Right.
apparent presence in the world. It just denies the ego's interpretation. It denies the veracity of that experience.
Hello and welcome to the Higher Vibe. I'm your host, Jean Rorda, and I have with me Bruce Rawles today. He is the author of The Geometry Code, as well as a prolific blogger for A Course in Miracles. And we've been friends for quite a long time. We kind of go way back. So I am delighted to see you again, Bruce, and have you on the podcast today. And I'm really excited about the topic we're going to be covering today. It is dear to my heart, so to speak. A Course in Miracles. So welcome. Hello.
Hi, thank you, Gene, and it's a delight to be here. And like you say, you've known each other from what about 2008 or 9 or something like that. Yeah, because I,
Good
I think I
times.
just kind of discovered Gary Renard's work, and then that connected me with our mutual friends in the Ashland, Oregon area where we both lived in the time.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
yeah, so I know
Well,
you've been an avid metaphysical enthusiast for a long time as well. So
that's right.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
We
yeah.
our worlds crossed in both the metaphysical sense
Yes, yes.
and yeah, our love for the A Course in Miracles.
Yeah, yeah.
Tell me, Bruce, how long has that been part of your world? When did you first kind of
Well,
integrate
actually, even
this?
before I encountered the course, I grew up in a household where I tell people I grew up in a nuclear family, literally and figuratively. My dad was
Yeah.
actually a cyclotron supervisor at Lawrence Livermore Labs.
Oh well.
And so I got terms like neutrino and
Yeah.
isotope and things at the dinner table. I thought every kid, in the world knew those words, and just discovered that that wasn't the case.
Right.
So it's kind of a nerdy community.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
he was kind of a person who liked nature, having grown up in an outdoorsy kind of family. And my
Mm-hmm.
mom, however, was not that she shunned the outdoors, but she had an experience when she was a teenager on Catalina Island where she saw a fleet of things going really fast
Mm-hmm.
in the sky
Mm-hmm.
and making an abrupt right angle turn
Yeah.
and then going and
Right.
despairing. And she said if she was hallucinating, it was a mass hallucination because she saw all the heads on the beach tracking in tandem,
Right.
and then when they
Everybody
all
saw
disappeared, they all kind of like, what was that? So anyway,
it.
fast forward a couple of decades, and so when she was in the approaching empty nest stage, and I was a teenager, she
Mm-hmm.
started amassing a lot of books about psychic phenomena and new agey stuff and metaphysics.
Yeah.
And among the library, which eventually occupied over 2 bedrooms and spilled out into the living and family room areas. Among those many, many books was 3 volumes, blue books entitled A Course in Miracles. And so I knew of them, and I was hearing about that they were catching on. I flipped through them in the late 70s a few times, and
Mm-hmm.
every time I read them was, kind of religious Christian sounding terms, and
Yeah.
I don't know, they're kind of my cup of tea. I was just kind of randomly flipping through.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I moved from the Bay Area to the foothills east of Sacramento and started working at a company called Grass Valley Group. And I discovered that there were other people, both that I work with as well as in the community at large, that were studying this thing called A Course in Miracles. And well, wait a minute, I think I know where those books
Yeah.
are. So
Oh,
next time I
good. Yeah.
visited my mom's house in Livermore, I said, "Can I borrow those 3 books?" And then wow, I realized there was a lot more to it than I thought, and it wasn't a religious thing, as I initially thought.
Yeah.
It was far more profound than that. And when I read it, I was going through a whole lot of stuff. I went through my father, my grandfather, my uncle, and a close friend who was studying the Course in Miracles. They all passed that year,
Wow.
as well as I went through a divorce, changed where I lived, change where I worked. Kind of one of those what they call off the chart years.
Yeah.
And so I read the course, really from a deep place of wanting and finding solace in and not really getting it so much intellectually, but just kind of, as Ken Wapnick, who's my favorite course teacher, says, like kind of reading it like an epic poem or letting it kind of wash through me. And that was very powerful. And it wasn't really until around 2007 that I was consulting for the Rogue Valley Metaphysical Library in Ashland, Oregon. And kudos to all those folks. And there was this book that kind of fell off the shelf, Gary Renard's Disappearance of the Universe.
Yeah.
And synchronistically, I was house sitting for a friend in Talent when I was living at Eagle Point and doing a little commute back and forth to Ashland. And she was going to Hawaii for a week. Oh, sure. Talent was closer to Ashland, and most of my client work was there. And I said, oh, I'd be happy to house sit for you. On her coffee table were Gary Renard's first two books, Disappearance of the Universe. And I didn't really pay much attention until after I went out to see a movie at the local art theater called Living Luminaries, and it had Don Miguel Ruiz in it, and Eckhart Tolle, I believe, and a handful of other people that were kind of, gaining some traction and popularity in that time. And I had interviewed Don Miguel Ruiz in a community radio station in Nevada City, California.
Nice.
Shout out to KVMR-FM.
He's the author of The Four Agreements?
Four Agreements, yes. Yeah. And really sweet guy. I think he's passed, but anyway, I had a chance to meet him and interview him on the radio, and that was fun. But there's this guy who's like, wait a minute, who's this Gary Renard person? I'd heard of most of all the other ones, and then I got back and it's like, oh, there's his two books on the coffee table, and I picked up the first one, started reading, and I couldn't put it down. I thought I had other plans for that week. I was gonna take that time to work on some projects and.
Yeah.
Never happened. I ended up basically blazing through Gary's first book. Yeah. And it was like, okay, I got to go back and read the course now.
Yeah.
And because, his teachers, Art and Persis, were saying that's really, an incredibly powerful spiritual document, spiritual psychotherapy. Is how oftentimes, if people describe what the course is about, well, it's a self-study course in spiritual psychotherapy is one way of putting it. Yeah. And it's about kindness, and it's about forgiveness, and all those things. But not just a little weekend workshop kind of thing.
No,
it's an in-depth, lifelong study and practice. Like in college, sometimes you have core classes that you take that have a lecture part and a lab part. Well, you kind of have to pass both the lecture and the lab to pass the class. Well, the theory, I think, if you study the course for, a decade or 3 or 4, as I have now, the theory starts to kind of click in, and it's like, well, now you see it more as a coherent whole. Yeah. But the lab is like, oh, now I've got to really practice this.
Yeah, now I got to go.
Oh, you mean I actually have to practice this in order to make it work for me? Oh, well, I have to actually forgive everything that I'm projecting on.
Words. Yeah. Yeah, that is the application of it that is a lifelong practice.
It really is. It really is.
Lifelong.
Yeah.
I think it's probably not a unique experience, Bruce, that when you read the course, your whole life sort of turns inside out.
Yeah.
You're probably not the only one that's had that experience. I think, and looking back to when I was first reading the course, there was definitely a lot of major changes going on. Maybe not I didn't have all these people die, but similar like big shifts in life going on.
Yeah.
And I also experienced, I love how you described it. You can understand it intellectually, but there's also just when you don't even try to figure it out intellectually and just let the words, it goes right to your heart, right to the core of your being.
It does.
And you just take it in and be with it, and there's a profound healing there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's so much easier than like trying to get your intellect to track it the whole time.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. But I think we have to kind of have at least some psychological, intellectual, recognition of what it's about. Yeah. And I think one of the premises is non-duality, which sounds like a fancy term, and it sounds kind of Eastern and mystical, but what it really just says is that there's just one being. And we think that we've pulled off this impossible crime that we call separation.
Yeah. It does appear that way.
We've got enormous amount of evidence in this world that seems to suggest we pulled off this impossible crime.
Yeah.
But the Course says it really is impossible, which means that another wild and crazy idea is that, what if we're actually 99.9, whatever, how many nines you want to go, percent of the time,
Yeah.
hallucinating?
Yeah.
Or maybe a little gentler term might be misinterpreting
Yes, yes.
what we're experiencing in the world, right?
Yes.
And so it's a challenging curriculum. It doesn't claim to be the only way to get back to peace, or to helping our mind restore its sanity, but it does claim to be a quick way.
Yes.
And I think it's quick only to the extent that we do the lab part.
Right, apply it.
But we have to kind of have some basic understanding that the belief in separation is the problem. The belief that we separated from our Creator, whatever you want to label or call that, perfect oneness, pure non-duality, God,
the all that is.
the all that there is, the essence. Yeah.
So many words.
Yeah, but there's that ongoing practice of seeing what we're doing to short circuit our experience of that and to sabotage the peace. And that's the work. So one of the foremost teachers of the Course, Ken Wapnick, who really worked tremendously with Helen Schuckman, who's the scribe of the Course, and Bill Thetford, who brought it forward. What Ken says is it's a not-no curriculum. It's not about affirming the truth, because if our real identity is the truth and we all share that, we don't have to establish it. It's not like we have to build something that isn't there. That's our real identity. It's just that we're metaphorically asleep to it. And if we're having a crazy dream that we're not at home, but we're dreaming of exile, is another cliche from the Course, safe at home but dreaming of exile.
Having an extensive nightmare.
having an extensive, exactly.
Maybe sometimes it's a happy dream.
Well, sometimes it can be a happy dream, because then that way it doesn't rock the ego's boat too much. And then the ego, of course, is really just a reference to the part of our mind that wants to be separate, that's wacky enough. And another Ken phrase I really like is, the ego, this part of us that wants to be separate, that likes being an individual, that likes being apart from other humans, other creatures, anything.
Own isolated.
Yeah, it's the ultimate. What was it? Marlene Dietrich, was that she the one? I want to be alone. But that's we push away.
Yeah.
Not just physically, but sometimes it's physically, but we psychologically distance ourselves from everyone and everything, because there's a part of our mind that knows that if we don't do that, we will be, I'm not sure if absorbed is the right word, but we will return back to the all-encompassing, innocent, loving, peaceful, profound oneness that we never left. And no self-disrespecting ego wants to do that.
Yes, no self-disrespect. That sounds like not existing to the ego.
Yeah. So the Course isn't about affirming what we are, because what we are is really just waiting patiently for us to return to our right minds and that sanity.
It needs no validation.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't require any mantras or affirmations or validations. Speaking of validations, I hope you don't mind a few asides. I do have one of my favorite cartoonists is Dan Ferraro, who does the Bizarro cartoon. And one of his cartoons shows a guy in a business suit and a briefcase and a business hat, and he's obviously kind of heading to some important business meeting or something, and there's a little booth. He's just come from the parking lot, and before he goes to the rest of the hotel or whatever, this is parking validation. And instead of handing the guy a ticket, the lady behind the counter says, "Beautiful job, almost a perfect right angle, evenly spaced, the tires evenly distanced from the curb, And so he got his parking validation.
Lots of validation for his parking.
Anyway, that's the kind of silly humor that I like.
No,
but that's
the way my brain works too.
That's one of the things that Ken Wapnick says, that the ego, if we try to fight against it, if we try to launch a nuclear attack against the insane part of our mind, we're just going to reinforce it.
Yeah, that's what
because the ego thinks of itself as evil, darkness, and sin. But it's not sinful, evil, or wicked. It's just silly.
Yeah.
I mean, it really,
like an oopsie daisy.
Exactly. So the whole premise, the cornerstone of the ego's unholy trinity of sin, guilt, and fear, which it applies to past, present, and future, is guilt. I mean, that's like the central pillar.
Yeah.
So as long as there's something to be guilty about, which the Course maintains there really isn't, the ego can go, I dodged that bullet,
Yeah, and that's such a sticky trap that I've noticed over the years getting stuck in, is then if you're guilty about having an ego.
Yeah, exactly. That's huge. I mean,
Like, gotcha.
you really nailed it, and that's right
Yeah.
at the very heart of the practice is
Yeah.
noticing how much we want to beat up ourselves when we're in ego mode, and noticing how there's that serene, calm, tranquil, gentle, patient, persevering, but not suffering. It's just it's kind of like the true stoicism of just watching and waiting and not judging, of just looking at the insane part of our mind and saying, if I just look at this and don't condemn it and don't feed the thing, eventually it'll be like the stray cat that's been hanging out on our front porch. Eventually it'll find another porch or another something to go
Nobody's
whine
feeding
at.
me here.
Exactly. Yeah.
Great analogy. The kitty cat, but the kitty cat's so cute.
Well, they are.
And it's over there saying, "I'm suffering. I need you."
Yeah, we're wondering if when we moved in here to this new place we just moved in a month ago, if the owners just decided, oh, we forgot the cat or what? Because anyway, it seems like
Can't
it
take
wants
the cat with us.
It
I
seems
have
like
actually moved into several homes in my many moves that came with a cat.
yeah. Well, we've already got 2 indoor cats.
One
And
reason or another.
we don't really want a third.
Right,
So,
right. So tell me, Bruce, how your book, The Geometry Code.
Oh,
I think
yeah,
it's
sure.
a brilliant kind of crossover between the world of sacred geometry and this world of non-duality. And, seeing the mind, right? There's just so much symbology in sacred geometry related to our mind and how it works and the universe. So talk to us about that.
I would love to. What I've been telling people lately, the last decade or so, is my interest in what's become known as sacred geometry is still growing arithmetically,
Yeah.
but my interest in non-dual metaphysics is growing geometrically.
Nice.
If that makes sense. It sounds like, but I'm not dissing
Just
the
to me,
geometry.
the visuals helped with that.
Yeah, that's exactly. Yeah. So it's basically, I always want to know what doesn't change. I mean, at a very young age, I thought, well, what's stable? Where's the certainty? Where's the sureness?
Yeah.
There's a wonderful sonnet. I can find it real quick because I'm online.
Well, it reminds me of this saying, because I had a similar like curiosity or inner knowing. There's that saying, the only constant is change. And I was always like, that's not true.
It's not satisfying, is it? It's just not satisfying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something that doesn't change.
Right. Yeah, if truth doesn't change, and if that's a working definition of, or at least one aspect of what's true, then anything that changes, which would necessarily pretty much involve anything involving space and time,
Yeah.
if you go out
Here in the world.
a few billion or trillion years, who knows how long this thing will last.
Right.
Most everything that we have experienced is not going to be around, or it'll be a tremendously different state of affairs. Yeah. So anyway, here's a Shakespeare sonnet.
Yeah.
Number 116, I think, addresses this. I will preface it with one dictionary term that I had to look up. The word bark, B-A-R-K. If you embark on a ship to go on a cruise, you're getting on a boat. So bark really refers to a boat or a ship.
Oh, interesting.
So anyway, in this wonderful little William Shakespeare sonnet, he's really talking about truth and how it doesn't change. So he says, "Let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments. Love is not love, which alters when it alteration finds, or bends with the remover to remove. Oh no, it is an ever fixed mark that looks on tempests and is never shaken. It is the star to every wandering bark, whose worth's unknown, although his height be taken. Love's not time's fool, though rosy lips and cheeks within his bending sickle's compass come. Love alters not with his brief hours and weeks, but bears it out even to the edge of doom. If this be error, and upon me proved, I never writ, nor no man ever loved." Isn't that great? I first was alerted to this wonderful little sonnet by a fellow named Stephen Marinoff, who has just left us a year or so ago, who I met in Ashland, and he would recite this from memory at some of our course study groups. So anyway, I always wanted to know, well, what's true? And to get back to your question, and well, one of the things that I found that didn't seem to change a lot was the laws of mathematics, and among them, the subset being the hands-on visual, identification. Geometry.
Yeah.
So I kind of started studying, mystical geometry in high school, and I kind of stumbled across things about Da Vinci and Plato and Pythagoras and this thing called the golden section or the golden ratio, also known as the extreme and means ratio, the divine proportion. It goes by a lot of names, and it's approximately 1.61803398874, and then it's an endless stream of digits.
Does it keep going like pi?
It's like pi, yeah, except pi is both irrational and transcendental, but phi, or the golden ratio, is only irrational, meaning it's not the quotient of two whole numbers. So it's actually the exact value is 1 plus the square root of 5 over 2, if you want to get out your calculator and go however many digits you want.
Yeah.
So what's that have to do with metaphysics? Well, what I discovered is that proportion shows up in a lot of places. Now, again, everything in this world is still a moving target, but within the context of that, as a reflection or maybe a symbol of the principle of what doesn't change, it's a good place to start. And it certainly kept me going for a long time, and I still find it interesting. So the golden ratio is a proportion which, when you take something like a line, for example, and try to divide it between a large part and a small part, and I'm going to do roughly the proportion there. The ratio of the whole to the large part is the same as the ratio of the large part to the small part. So that's how you get the extreme and mean ratio. You basically set that up and you just do the math and plug it into the quadratic formula, and you get that value, 1 plus the square root of 5 over 2. So what does that mean? Well, what it means is that if you take the large part and then add the small part to it, what's left over is another golden ratio. And you can keep doing that. And so you can basically create what's called, a fractal. Some of your listeners are probably familiar with that term. It's been around a few decades now. Yes. And it's intrinsic to anything that's got a 5-pointed symmetry. So, for example, if you make a 5-pointed star or a pentagram and inscribe it inside a pentagon, and then extend those lines to make an even larger pentagram, and which can then be inscribed inside of a much larger pentagon and ad infinitum, each one of those segments is scaled by the golden ratio. It's basically intrinsically, and the way I like to describe it is a ratio where the proportion is such that when you add unity to that ratio, you get that number squared or raised to a higher level. But it's basically a proportion that is consistent or unchanging, if you will, regardless of the scale at which you keep applying it. So, and that's why it keeps showing up mathematically in all kinds of things, from flora and fauna. For example, if you take the ratio of spirals of a sunflower head, there's like, I think it's like 34, either 55 or 34. They're Fibonacci numbers, which is they're all related by the golden ratio. The series of Fibonacci numbers, just real briefly, is you start with 1 and 1, and then the next number in the series is the sum of the previous two. So it goes 1, 1, 2. And then 3, 5, 8, 13, 21, 34, 55, 89, 144, and so on. And as you go through the series and take the ratio of any two consecutive numbers, it gets closer and closer to that golden ratio. And at infinity, it exactly eats, if people have done limits in calculus, they know about limits. At infinity, it exactly equals that golden ratio.
It's so cool.
So, but you can look at the joints in your hand, and for example, this joint compared to that joint compared to this joint compared to they're roughly golden ratio proportions. You can take your distance from the navel to the ground to the navel to the top of the head when you're standing up, and that's roughly the golden ratio. The Parthenon at Acropolis, the front facade is a golden rectangle, which is proportions of 1 and 1.618 or phi. The apothem of the Great Pyramid at Giza is the imaginary line. If you draw from the apex or the top of the pyramid down to the middle of one of the base sides, and then you take that midpoint and go to one of the corners, that ratio is also the golden ratio. So, it just shows up all kinds of places. The United Nations building was made of 3 stacked golden rectangles. everyone, all the Renaissance artists from Da Vinci and Raphael and scores and scores of others use that.
Yeah.
And when they do restoration on some of those vintage paintings, they use X-ray technology to see what pigments were used and how to get the restoration just right. Well, they oftentimes find these little drawing marks underneath the paint through the X-ray process, and they can see golden rectangles and golden triangles and pentagrams, and all of them are basically just riddled with this golden ratio proportion. So I learned about this back in the early 70s from a book called Secrets of the Great Pyramid by Peter Tompkins, which is one of the ones that was sort of an adjunct to my mom's metaphysical library. She was my pusher. She was my feeding me with some of these kind of things, and I was gobbling it up. But I always wondered, well, what doesn't change, and so that held me over for quite a while, and along with a bunch of other sort of what I would call now new agey kind of ideas and things. But there's also another shape in what's become known as sacred geometry. It's the vesica piscis, and that's the shape where if you take two circles that are the same size and overlap them in such a manner that the circumference, the perimeter of one touches the center of the other, and vice versa, you get this what's called an almond or a mandorla or a vesica piscis shape. Vesica piscis actually means fish bladder, but but that's about kind of roughly.
That sounds a lot less elegant.
It does sound a lot less elegant than vesica piscis, right?
Yeah.
But the shape of the eye, the shape of the stomata in plants, that where there's a communication or an exchange or an interchange, that's basically the idea of shared interest, shared values, shared identity. And that's, in a lot of depictions of religious art, and religious art of Jesus have his figure within the Vesica Piscis. And then, of course, Salvador Dali took it even further with the Last Supper, his Sacrament of the Last Supper, which I'd seen pictures of it in books. Gosh, a few decades ago, we went to Washington, D.C., and the Smithsonian. At the time, they had it hanging between floors, in the stairwell. Yeah. And you just kind of like, oh my gosh, there it is. And it was like, I'm not really big on religious art, but I like tears were streaming down my face when I saw the feeling behind that painting was just profound. And he was, I think, both intuitively as well as consciously using his inspiration, not just the intellectual part of the golden ratio and all that, because he had the table of the Last Supper was if you've seen that painting, it's basically inside like a luminous translucent dodecahedron, which is a shape made out of 12, appropriately enough for the 12 disciples, pentagons, again having that golden ratio geometry in each pentagon face. And that's not what you get emotionally, but I think that adds to it on a level that perhaps we're not aware of. But he was using that to consciously invoke that essential quality. Anyway.
Wow.
But so I've been fascinated with sacred geometry for a long time, and I built and lived in a geodesic dome in Georgetown, California, with the tip of the hat to Bucky Fuller. I
didn't know that.
I bought the kit from a company in Aptos, California, near Santa Cruz that actually paid royalties to the Bucky Fuller estate. I kind of casually mentioned at one of the RVML Rogue Valley Metaphysical Libraries that I was interested in sacred geometry, and a couple of people overheard me, and there's still every once in a long while we were meeting weekly for a number of years that we called ourselves the Geometers, and the even more punny name was the Hedronists, because it was not the hedonists, but the hedronists, because we were interested in polyhedra and things like that.
That's so fun. I didn't know that connection though.
Yeah. So you probably know. I could probably rattle off a few names.
I'm familiar with Buckminster Fuller only because my dad built a dome.
Oh, he did. I see. I didn't know that.
4 years old, and so I grew up in a geodesic dome as well.
So you grew. Okay, how interesting. Okay, I did not know
the windows that I looked at in my room there were pentagons, hexagons, and then squares that were all kind of centered around a central point. So they also kind of had that pentagon shape. And
I should have known that. See.
So that was my introduction.
So we both have lived in a geodesic dome.
Looking at the structure in the in the home.
Yep.
It's amazing. I love all the symbology. Like you look at sacred geometry, and it points to how we're living in this universe of just all symbols. Everything is very symbolic.
Exactly.
And so you see that with the geometry, how it does also point to what is constant, that oneness.
Right. Right.
That's beneath the surface, so to speak,
Yeah, yeah,
of
yeah,
all the
yeah.
fractally other things.
Exactly. And that brings up another point that really, thank you for kind of steering it back to that, metaphysical aspect of what's sacred about sacred geometry is that
Yeah.
we all have never left the source. And there's really just one of us dreaming of multiplicity or duality or whatever you want to call it. And so the vesica piscis embodies that. The interconnectedness of the golden ratio and everywhere it appears embodies that. But only when we're in that frame of mind.
Yeah.
And when we're in a frame of mind where we want to see the interconnectedness and the sameness and, leading to the truth, awareness of the truth that doesn't change, or at least reflecting that truth.
Yeah, it's always there, but you do have to look for it. You do have
Exactly.
to choose to see it.
Yes, yeah.
Because you can very easily not see it if you're
Right.
looking at all the distractions.
Exactly. And so the distractions are what we made mostly on an unconscious level because there's a part of our mind that's still afraid of returning to source and to having an experience of peace that's so profound that we won't care about what happens or doesn't happen in the world.
Yeah, we'll just be obliterated.
Well, it's not that we will be obliterated.
Right.
It'll be the self that we thought we made
Right.
that in truth is really a hallucination
Yeah.
that will disappear. And A Course in Miracles uses a language that I really love. It's that it will merely cease to seem to be.
Yes.
Isn't that great?
That's
Yeah.
great.
Because it's not like we're having to blast away, some arch evil,
Right.
super anti-hero.
Right.
It's like I just have to realize that I made up a persona and a thought system. And we all did it. I mean, it wasn't like an isolated thing. We all made up an idea of separation, and we're all walking around like zombies. Toward the end of the glossary there.
Zombie apocalypse.
Exactly, and we're all just like mindless automatons thinking, well, I pulled off this impossible crime, and so I have to, be as miserable as it suggests. And it's like, no, wait,
And be guilty.
and that's
And then there's the
core
fear,
idea. Yeah.
The fear of returning to the oneness is if you still believe in that separate identity or
Right.
think that that's what you are, then you're going to be punished.
Ooh. But the thing is that we're already doing that.
Right.
The very fact that we think we're stuck in a finite dimensional space-time prison
Right.
that we call biological life on a little planet.
Yeah. We're already in prison.
That's
Thinking
it.
way.
That's it. We can seem to make it worse or better.
Right.
But the very fact that we think we've pulled off this crime of separation, and we feel on mostly an unconscious level horrible about that, that's punishment enough, And we're doing it because we're kind of like saying, if you were to put into words, okay, God, you're not the real God, but that has nothing to do with all our dreams, but the ego's God, just like we're saying, I got this. You don't have to punish me. I'll take care of it. I'll put myself in a.
I'll fix this.
I'll suffer.
Yeah.
But I'll suffer at the hands of all these other no good nicks that are doing all this stuff to me, and I'll fill my media, all my screens with all kinds of politicians and businessmen and environmental abusers and social misfits and all the things that the things that cross our screens on a daily basis. Even if we were to live in a cave, our mental screen, let alone our physical, LCD backlit stuff, we've got plenty to work with because we're projecting like crazy. And that's where it becomes super pragmatic.
Right.
Because anything that pushes our buttons in the world, the non-dual metaphysics, not just A Course in Miracles, but any non-dual teaching, like the Advaita Vedanta. I just spoke with a couple of gentlemen from Australia last night, I guess it was, who've studied the Vedanta, and they were, kind of saying how similar a lot of that ideas are. But the idea being that we never left perfect oneness. We couldn't. But because our minds are so powerful, we can imagine that we did. And that's what we experience. That's what we experience most of the time. Yeah. So in order to really undo that, we have to be willing, gently, patiently vigilant, to just keep looking at our minds and say, what a crazy idea.
Yeah.
When I see this clearly,
Bad idea.
and I'm not trying to fight what I made, but just look at it without condemnation.
Doesn't the course calls it the tiny mad idea,
A
right?
tiny mad idea.
And I love that. I love
TMI.
that it
Yeah.
adds the tiny, right? Because it
Yes.
seems so big. This
It's
seems just like
tiny.
right, it's
Super, super tiny.
It's an itty bitty oopsie.
It's so tiny it doesn't appear on the
It's a
most
blip on
powerful
the screen, right?
electron microscope or any
Right.
whatever they use to look at quarks or whatever these days. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just
Yeah.
like a blip on the screen, but
Yeah.
we make it into this just endlessly complex, enormously, ridiculously
Well, that's just it.
huge
Yeah.
big deal.
Yeah, exactly. A really big deal. In
Really
fact,
big deal.
we've got everything exactly bass backwards, upside down, and inside out. Because what we've done is we've taken the nothing that is the ego thought system, which is continuously projecting onto the world of space-time, so that we have a hot and cold running alibis available at every moment. So we have an excuse we got our flamethrower fired up. So
Right.
I'm not
Yeah.
responsible. It's all
And
these
projecting out all
these
that
crazy
fear
people in the
guilt, right?
world that are doing things on the evening news and
Yes.
and social media and yada yada and
They're the bad guys.
all those bad guys. But I'm innocent.
Nope.
But that's not real innocence. As
Yeah,
long
yeah,
as I try to remind myself as if I may not be doing physical assassinations, but if I'm blaming someone
Yeah.
and I'm saying that their essence is no good, not that their behavior might be
Yeah, it's not about the
a
form.
little suspect at times, including mine. But if I condemn their essence, if I say the core of what those other people are doing is foul or abhorrent or whatever, I'm making that same judgment to myself, because one of the core principles in the course is minds are joined and ideas don't leave their source. So what I'm experiencing is happening in my mind, and it's my interpretation that needs maybe a lot of correction, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is where it gets really challenging for folks with even considering the thought system of non-duality, because
Right,
there's all
right.
the
Oh,
yeah
yeah.
buts. There's like, but what
Right.
about genocide? But what
Right,
about,
right.
murder? But what about like all the atrocities that we see
Right.
in this universe of
Right.
illusory existence?
Exactly.
And yeah, that can be kind of the ego's little yeah buts,
Exactly. And for every yeah but,
Yeah.
the Holy Spirit, which is the Course's term, all AKA Jesus of the Course, is not the biblical version. It's
Right.
not the historical version. It's basically anything that represents an ego-free presence in our mind will work. You can throw whatever label you want on it.
Right.
Rumpelstiltskin, if that works for you.
Yeah, that's a good one.
But anything that doesn't have duality as its core premise will work just fine. But that part of our mind simply says, "Forgive, and you will see this differently." Learn to see what you're doing with your mind. Look at the projection. Freudian term for taking what I don't like, what I'm seeing in my mind, and that's why it's not a more popular course. I mean, there aren't 8 billion people clamoring to study and practice the course, because it's a pretty challenging curriculum. It doesn't claim to be the only way back to sanity or perfect oneness. It just says it's a way that can be, if we are consistent with it.
Yeah. Very effective when applied.
A quick way. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it reminds me of, okay, so I'm going to get into Star Trek with the holodeck.
Oh,
right?
good. Oh, good.
Yeah.
We just watched an episode of Black Mirror the other evening that had it's called the Callister. There's 2 episodes, and they're pretty interesting. There's a lot about projection there if you read kind of read behind the scenes.
Yeah, there's a lot of symbolic meaning in that.
Yeah. Anyway, please go ahead.
But because there's a lot of different, there's the holodeck, there's a lot of different versions of that out there.
Right.
But just where it reminds me of what you're speaking to with projection, like how the mind can create just all this horrific stuff that we see happening.
Right.
As these symbols of, as you said before, the projection and how the ego projects out all the guilt and the fear and the separation.
Yep.
And then that kind of turns into this barrage, this endless barrage of symbols of that, which show up as war, genocide, hate, violence, all of the things. But when we look at something on a holodeck, if we can imagine, as it were, that this is one giant holodeck.
Exactly.
When you change what's projecting out from the mind, right? When you forgive and you see the innocence underneath all of that projection of fear and guilt, your perception changes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So
So
you recognize
true.
that as just an aspect of the ego out there.
Right. And we can't do that with the ego.
Right.
I mean, we have to use the other part of our mind that looks at the ego without condemnation, which the ego can't do. So automatically, if we're looking at the ego without beating up on ourselves, we're using Holy Spirit. We're using, whatever label you want to put on that. We're using that part of our mind that's sane, that is reasonable, that doesn't want to suffer or anyone else to suffer, and is willing to see in most infinitely kind way that the only way out of that dilemma is to change our perception and let go of the ego's misinterpretation of everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It brings so much peace, and yet it also brings out, I would say, the resistance, right, all around.
Absolutely. So so not get blindsided by that, we have to, slowly but surely start practicing moment by moment by moment, day by day by day, to just notice when we're not at peace, when there's something that's bugging us, whether it's a fly in the room or
I think it flew away.
See, there you go. You let go of it and it disappears, right? Or at least there's a ceasefire. Yeah.
Right.
But that's really all the ego can hope for is a ceasefire, because it never really solves the problem from that level. We have to go above the battleground metaphorically in order to really experience real peace, and that's a lifelong project.
Yeah. But once you see it, like once you're aware that, oh yeah, it's almost like when you have your first real experience of forgiving from that place that we call you had so many words for it, Rumpelstiltskin.
How about right mind?
The right mind,
the sane mind, the miracle mind, the forgiving mind. Yeah, they're all equivalent. The atonement
the
mind,
non-dual,
the salvation mind, the resurrection mind.
Right. There's so many words for it. But once you glimpse that, for me, it's easier and easier to come back to it because it does bring total peace, and it does actually transform the outer experience as well over time. And then the contrast between the dual-minded thinking and the non-dual-minded thinking becomes so clear.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Any disturbance is like, oh, clearly we're
right. Yeah.
Disturbance in the field. That you get to see that contrast and recognize it quicker, and make a new decision to come back to forgiveness. And so I guess I'm putting that out there as a little teaser, like.
Well, that's really the whole practice, and it's really profoundly simple.
Yeah.
But because our minds are so powerful, we've made, outrageously complicated identity and a thought system that will do anything that it can to sabotage and short circuit our attempts to restore peace to our mind, because it's basically is threatening ironically the non-existent existence of that thought system. If that makes sense.
Trying really hard to threaten.
Yeah.
Eternity.
So we're not really getting rid of anything. So we don't have to launch an attack, because that's what the ego would do is try to attack. Right. But we do have to be willing to just notice when I'm not at peace, I must have chosen the wrong inner teacher. And there's only two. And that's really simple, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. And remember to laugh. That part of the Course that talks about the tiny mad idea, it continues to say, into eternity where all is one, they are corrupt. The tiny mad idea, at which the Son of God, meaning the oneness of beingness, forgot to laugh.
Remembered not to laugh. Exactly.
Remembered not to laugh.
Exactly, yeah.
Meaning it forgot. Didn't it? Yeah, I do laugh a lot, and it's not always coming from that place of recognizing truth, but most of the time. That's why that recognition of truth just comes up in my mind, and then whatever I'm perceiving becomes really funny.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it's that mad tiny idea, or that ego mind.
It's the forgiving mind that is willing to overlook the insanity. It doesn't deny its apparent presence in the world. It just denies the ego's interpretation. It denies the veracity of that experience. It's kind of like when you wake up from a dream. You don't say, "Oh, I didn't have that dream," but you just say, "That was one hell of a dream," or "That was one wild thing, wild, crazy dream." Yeah.
Right. It's not about resisting or trying to get rid of the dream.
Right, right.
It's just recognizing that it was a dream.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean,
that was one hell of a dream.
and on normal daily life, if you go through the yellow pages, which most people don't have anymore because it's on our phones, I'm dating myself. But if you Google dream eradication, you don't find too many, businesses doing that, right?
Right. Yeah,
So,
you don't have to try to get rid of the
you don't have to try to get rid of the dreams. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. But another metaphor I like is, since you mentioned the holodeck,
Yes.
we're rearranging holodeck chairs on a Titanic dream.
Right. Yeah. I was thinking about that earlier when we were talking about, trying to fix or solve something in the dream. It's like it's very entertaining to rearrange the furniture on the Titanic, but is that going to do anything really?
Or move to a new house every few years is something you can probably relate to.
Yeah.
As I
you and I both do that a lot. Huh?
We've done a fair share, yeah.
I mean,
but there's nothing wrong with that. It's just it doesn't bring us the peace of God, or the peace of the pure non-dual presence that we think we threw away, but we couldn't possibly. Yeah, that's the beauty of it, and no one can.
Right.
And remembering that that's true for everyone is, I think, a huge part of it too.
Absolutely.
That no one can be left out. And that's also what makes it really challenging, because there's usually at least a small percentage of people that, if we're honest with us, we still love to hate, or at least we're tempted to not give full.
Everybody's great except for that guy.
Full validation. Exactly. No, they've kind of gotten better. So now I'm shifting to this other guy.
Yeah. Okay, maybe that one's tolerable.
Right.
Yeah, there's always someone that is the target of our
the scapegoat in our goatscape. Right. Yeah. Getting back to, since you brought up the geometry interest, I've got a website that's geometrycode.com, and I try to add to that every month, and also ACIMblog.com. But the geometry stuff is still really interesting to me, because I think there's a lot of geometric symbols. We talked about a couple, the golden ratio and all of its appearances, and pentagrams, dodecahedra, anything that's got five-sided symmetry, which is any edible fruit has a five-petaled flower. The vesica piscis is, again, those overlapping circles really represent shared interest, a shared identity. And then we talk about fractals. Well, if you think of like the roots of a tree, and then they all come together in the trunk, and then on the above ground they start branching out again. If you think about what's really the point of stability for the tree, is that intersection between the earth and the sky, the trunk. And it's that we can either kind of go toward more and more fragmentation, which in our culture we're taught, well, that's beautiful because it's fragmenting and it's dividing and making all these differences. And the courses of metaphysics, I think really genuine non-dual teaching would say, well, ultimately we have to use the exact same symbol, but kind of put it in reverse. Instead of trying to make separation a big deal, what is the common attributes? What is the essence that brings us back to that still center? And that's where the peace is. And that's where the real tranquility is. And that's something that, symbolically, metaphorically, is the process of seeing where we've divided the we-they paradigm, and then begin to reverse that. Years ago, when I worked in a high-tech company in Northern California called Grass Valley Group, before the internet, there was Xerox machines, and people would find funny things and photocopy them and sprinkle them on people's desks. One of the things that made its way to my desk was a thing called all the sub-laws of Murphy's Law.
Okay.
And if you remember Murphy's Law, it's the old pessimistic thought of, if anything can go wrong, it will, which of course would be a perfect ego mantra.
Sounds
right?
like the ego,
yeah. But there was all these sub-laws that I thought were real gems too. I mean, there were some of the ones that people probably heard of, like the probability of the bread landing butter side down is directly proportional to the cost of the carpet, things like that. Oh, another little gem is, inside of every little problem is a much bigger problem struggling to get out. I mean, that classic ego thinking, right?
I know, this is all the ego thinking.
Yeah. But I think my favorite of the bunch, toward the bottom of the list, might have been the last one. I wish I could, if anybody runs across a copy, I'd love to see it if they run across this. But it was a thing called Garth's Distinction. And Garth's Distinction says, there are two types of people in the world. Those who divide people into two types, and those who don't. So there's duality and it's correction, right?
Yeah,
a little Zen sentence. Yeah.
I love the ways that we can apply this recognition of ego thinking versus Holy Spirit thinking, or whatever words we want to apply to these two different ways of thinking, non-dual or dual thinking.
Yeah.
And just applying it in our life. I've noticed how much peace I can find in
Yeah.
any relationship with anyone when I'm really
Right.
seeing that, again, words, light of spirit, or that wholeness,
Yeah. Yeah.
that
Yeah.
oneness within anyone. And
Right.
there's going to be those people that's more challenging for, right? Because we're projecting more of that guilt onto them, or more of that whatever it is from the subconscious mind. But to just remember to see that with any, well, maybe especially with the people that you're like, oh, I don't like that person.
That's usually a clue. It's all like the virtual dashboard of our mind. It's like
Right.
alert, alert. It's
Right,
like,
right,
okay, here's a prime, mathematically perfect, if you will,
Yeah.
forgiveness classroom for you.
Exactly.
If your buttons are being pushed, guess what inner electrician did the wiring?
Yeah.
And it's not anyone out there.
Yeah.
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 I think that's one of the more challenging ideas is in any good non-dual metaphysical curriculum is reminding ourselves that what we're experiencing is not happening in an objective world. And even modern physics tells us that. And that's why a lot of those folks a few decades ago, when they were birthing quantum theory, almost became mystics of necessity, because they realized,
Yeah.
we got this thing all wrong. It's not happening out there. I mean, if matter is subject to mind, then we got to rethink this whole thing.
Yeah.
The wave particle
Well,
duality.
there's a thing going on than we think.
You expect a particle, you get a particle. You expect
Yeah.
a wave, you get a wave. Well,
Right.
I guess we can't exclude mind from our
Yeah.
equations now, can we? How do we put mind back in the equation? Not brain, but mind. Yeah.
Is that how science eventually met God, right? Science.
Well, yeah, I mentioned Ken Wapnick before. He's a wonderful teacher. If I highly recommend anything he's done, you can go to facim.org, which is the sister organization to the Foundation for Inner Peace, which is celebrating the 50-year anniversary of the publication of A Course in Miracles.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, yeah. And their website is acim.org. So if you go to facim.org and acim.org, you've got a lot of wonderful resources there. And I highly recommend both for anybody who's curious about the course. But, again, it doesn't position itself as being for everybody. It's not trying to convert anyone. There's no recruitment or
Nor are we.
or sanctioned teachers or gurus or what. It's all about. It really is a self-study course.
Yeah.
But we're asked to study what we're doing with our mind, as an inner inquiry and an introspective process of just noticing that when I'm not at peace, I must have chosen wrongly.
Yeah.
But it's correctable. That was another thing. I remember I took an early copy of the course backpacking with me in the 80s, and I remember reading. There's a chapter in the text about sin versus error, and I remember it's like, wow, that changes everything.
Yeah.
So if sin is something that is uncorrectable, that's like, oh well, too bad.
Right.
You're doomed.
You're bad.
Yeah, you're.
And you were born that way.
Yeah. You are more than bad. You are like, the heart of evil kind of thing.
Yeah.
And unredeemable. The sin, guilt, fear is like, something that you can't erase or undo. Well, the Course basically turns that upside down and said, no, not only is it undoable, it never happened.
Never happened.
In truth. Now, within the dream we made up, we made it up so that it seems undeniable, and yet it's really a perceptual shift that's being asked for, and we can't do that on our own. We need a lot of help, but we all have the same help. The form is different, but that part of our mind that is willing to respond to a sincere request that I want to be kind to myself and everyone else.
Yeah,
that'll do it. That'll do it.
Kindness is so key. What comes up right away in my mind is like the naysayers, right?
Well, sure, which is good to address that too, because
because I see this a lot out there where someone kind of starts to begin to hear a little bit about the Course and how non-dual thinking is really directing you to see the world through that non-dual lens.
Right.
And then sometimes that's perceived as, the words we hear a lot now are spiritual bypassing, or you're ignoring suffering. Right. And I think it's so important to recognize, like what you said, it's not about denying that the dream is happening. It's not about denying anything that's happening in the dream.
Exactly.
And it actually allows you to be more fully present with all of the deep levels of suffering and darkness and pain that exist here.
Right. But not take them seriously.
Right.
But acknowledge
the pain.
Yeah.
When you're seeing it from that non-dual perspective. Go ahead.
Right. Oh, sorry. I was just thinking about something that Bill Thetford said that I really find helpful. He says, I know it's hopeless, referring to the ego and the world that everyone's ego is made.
Yeah.
but it's not serious.
Right.
So that's basically not derisively, not in any
Right.
kind of mean-spirited way, but
Right. With
but just
kindness.
just a kind, gentle,
Yeah.
patient, relaxed awareness of like, well, the world may be crazy, but it's always been crazy.
Yeah.
It's not going to get any less crazy
I know.
because I, on my own, am going to try to fix it.
Right.
But if I wake up from the dream that I call reality, I will sooner or later see that I took that dream way too seriously. And like you say, ironically or maybe wonderfully, when we have that perspective, we're not attached to the outcomes of the world. And by being not attached, we actually have a much, much wider spectrum of choices to work with. And we can allow ourselves to be guided on the level of form to do the things that can be most helpful and
Right.
effective,
I can support.
while at the same time not making the outcome the important thing. But,
Right.
but it's really what teacher in my mind am I using to see things? Because that's really the way out, not
Yeah.
fixing the world.
Right. That's what really gives us the capacity to be with the suffering,
Right,
which
right.
is what compassion is.
Yeah,
Because we don't become the suffering that we're with when you're
right.
seeing it from the lens of forgiveness and non-duality, oneness. Again, the words. I took
Yeah.
over the words because there's so many words for the
There's a lot of words.
what we're pointing to.
Yeah,
But when
yeah,
you
yeah.
see it like that,
Yeah.
and again, that another way of saying that is you're not attached to the outcome because
Right,
you
right.
know that this is a wild dream.
Yeah,
Then you can really be with that suffering, and like you said, however Holy Spirit is inspiring you to offer support, you're able to do it because when you're seeing it from that dual or ego mind, you're going to be so wrapped up in all the pain that you're kind of going to be an emotional mess. You'll either be super angry all the time, super sad all the time, like debilitating grief, all these things, because it is hopeless.
on that level,
I
it
don't
is.
hear that, but like you're
Right,
not
right,
going to
right,
fix
right.
duality, right?
But if you recognize that the level at which hopelessness exists is a fabricated misinterpretation, then there's a way out. And the Course says it may be foolproof because we're fooling ourselves all the time, but it's not God-proof.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I know, it's such a relief. That's, I guess, what I'm trying to convey here is just how much of a relief and a release and a sense of deep, unshakable peace happens when you see that and recognize that and apply that
right.
anytime there's a disturbance in the field, which is, still quite often. There are no end to disturbances in the field.
So we've trusted the farce, and that's been our problem, right?
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much, Bruce, for sharing your time with us today.
My
and
pleasure completely. And
speaking about the Course. Do you have any final favorite quotes from the Course you'd like to share? I call it the Course, but it's A Course in Miracles.
A Course in Miracles, yeah. I do have one that I will find that came up in one of the many online groups I attend every week, and I can find it very quickly because there's this web edition that I link to very extensively in this glossary I put together.
There's so many great tools now. The Course, isn't there an app too?
There's a wonderful app put up by the Foundation for Inner Peace.
And there's an online version. And A Course in Miracles has been interpreted into many different languages.
27 and counting. So anyway, since you asked, I'll read something that I find really inspiring. And it's basically, when I read Gary Renard's books, there were two things that I didn't get through. Because I mentioned when I first picked up the Course in the mid-'80s, it kind of flowed through me. And it was really only when I got into Gary's work and then shortly thereafter Ken Wapnick's brilliant, prolific, prodigious, and profound work that I became aware of how much there really was that I needed to really begin to understand and, more importantly, practice. And so anyway, there were two things in Gary's books that he, I think, if I already mentioned, please forgive, because the Course is about forgiveness. And that is, the Course is all about forgiveness.
Yes.
And it's all about the idea that perfect oneness, aka God, the truth, the capital L love, the pure non-dual reality that we all share, that is eternally our identity, has nothing to do with what we think of ourselves in space and time and bodies and matter and energy and all that whole physical material universe stuff, right? So this, I think, fits in very nicely with that. And that's a stretch. The Course says there is no world. This is the central thought the Course attempts to teach, which I know some of the people listening probably have never heard of the course, and if that sounds too outlandish, just forget that.
Yeah, don't worry about it.
Just use the neuralizer like in Men in Black, and just say Bruce never said that. No, just forget that I said that for now, and maybe years later you watch the replays. Oh, he did say that, but anyway, but for right now, I just think this is such a wonderful paragraph and a half, let's say. So here it's talking, this is the guiltless world, and this is paragraphs 2 and a little bit of 3 in the introduction of the text of A Course in Miracles. And it goes, the acceptance of guilt into the mind of God's Son was the beginning of the separation, as the acceptance of the atonement is its end, which is the correction. The world you see is the delusional system of those made mad by guilt. Look carefully at this world and you will realize that this is so. For this world is the symbol of punishment, and all the laws that seem to govern it are the laws of death. Children are born into it through pain and in pain. Their growth is attended by suffering, and they learn of sorrow and separation and death. Their minds seem to be trapped in their brain, and its powers to decline if their bodies are hurt. And here's where it gets really potent. They seem to love, yet they desert and are deserted. They appear to lose what they love, perhaps the most insane belief of all. And their bodies wither and gasp and are laid in the ground and are no more. Not one of them but has thought that God is cruel. If this were the real world, God would be cruel. For no father could subject his children to this as the price of salvation and be loving. Love does not kill to save. And it goes on from there. That just so beautifully illustrates that our real identity is eternal innocence, it's eternal love, it's eternal kindness, inclusiveness. I mean, there's no one or no thing left out. Not physical stuff, but no real identity, and we're all that same real identity. Wow. And so there's no cruelty, there's no meanness, there's no craziness in our real identity. It's an eternal thing that we're just beginning to learn how to return to.
Yeah.
So anyway.
I love that. No, I love that you picked that, because when I think back to childhood, I was raised in Christianity, and there was always kind of this nagging thing in the back of my mind, like, well, God is love, but why doesn't it appear that way according to all these stories in scriptures and this current reality, if we perceive God as this separate entity that's in charge of everything that's happening here.
Right. And interacting with our dream of space and time.
Then that would be crazy.
Yeah.
And so I perpetually had a look of confusion on my face at church. Because
I can relate.
The math doesn't check.
There's something wrong with this picture, that God gets
this
upset.
Equation is not checking out.
If God gets upset by what I do or don't do in the world, He needs therapy, right?
Right.
Something like that, right?
So years later in studying the course, it was like, exactly. Like, I just always had this very enthusiastic sense of gratitude for that clarity that it brought, because it was so intuitively true in my mind right away.
Right.
And it clarified, what was missing in that equation.
Exactly.
Which is just what you pointed to. So that was the response I had in reading the course, was exactly.
It solves so many conundrums, doesn't it?
Right?
Yeah. It solves so many puzzles and riddles and conundrums and head-scratching stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the only thing that makes sense.
Yeah.
If God is love, that is the only way that works. Just non-duality.
Exactly. So, well, thank you, Jean. I really enjoyed our conversation immensely.
You, Bruce.
Yeah.
So much fun.
Yeah.
Thank you,
I've been enjoying your new book of poems.
Yay! I'm so glad you're reading through those.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today on The Higher Vibe. We'll see you next time. Hello. Thank you so much for being here. We appreciate you watching. I hope you enjoyed what you saw. If you did, go ahead and hit like and subscribe. Share this with friends. Really helps us out, and we really appreciate it. And we look forward to seeing you next time.